The arch-villain was still alive, but the Russians were in Berlin and only a city block from his bunker. Lost in the thunder of the great guns was a single pistol shot. Adolf Hitler had blown out his brains. When the Russians reached the Führer bunker, all they took out were some generals and the last will and testament of Adolf Hitler. In it, he blamed the Jews for everything. There were reports that the hard core of surviving Nazis would make a last stand in the Bavarian Alps. Allied bombers took no chances. The Nazis' Alpine redoubt was a myth. Only near Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat, was there a high Nazi. The Americans overran the eagle's nest and found the peacock, Hermann Goering. The 4th Canadian Division was now in Germany itself. For all but a few weeks of the entire war, the Canadians had been liberating ground which belonged to friendly peoples. Now they were capturing enemy ground. The civilians were not friends, but potential killers. The veterans from Canada moved with great caution and cold blood, protecting their lives as they gouged out the last of the Third Reich. The Canadians were still pressing on when on the 4th of May, 1945, the representatives of the German High Command met at Lüneburg Heath with Montgomery. The Germans were hesitant, and Montgomery showed them on a map what would happen to their armies if they did not agree to his ultimatum. The Germans wept and then sat down to surrender.
The German delegation will now sign this paper, and they will sign in order of seniority, and General Admiral von Friedeberg will sign first. Now, General Kinsel will sign next.
As the German officers filed to Montgomery's table in turn, the signal went out to the Canadians. Fighting on the Western Front would cease as of 8 a.m. on the 5th of May. That evening in the Canadian sectors, the Germans surrendered to General Guy Simonds and General Charles Foulkes. It was D plus 333, 333 days since the assault on the Normandy beaches. In these 11 months, 11,336 Canadians had been killed in North Europe. The bell tolled for Germany, and the Nazi soldier followed his generals into the compounds. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, successor to Adolf Hitler. He was in office only long enough to surrender. His dreaded U-boat wolf packs rose to the surface to be herded from the sea. Under the warm spring sun, the Canadian seaman could relax his 6-year vigil. The Canadian airman, who had lived so long from day to day, could look beyond the night ahead. For the Navy and the Air Force, the pressure had eased off towards the last. For the Canadian foot soldier, the pressure had mounted to the final nervous minute.
I figured we'd all get loaded and have a hell of a time. But when it happened, we just stood around, trying to believe it. I guess we were just too damn tired.
The final surrender was signed on the 7th of May. The next day was designated as VE Day, but nobody could wait. In London, the Canadian colony was out in force. In Canada, the roof came off. It was the wildest holiday in history. The bells on the Peace Tower rang with joy and sorrow. Nearly 50,000 Canadian families had their private grief. But the death of one man had been felt by every Canadian family. The good neighbor, Franklin Roosevelt, had not lived to see the victory. Mackenzie King was at the graveside of his friend. Soon after, he made another trip to the U.S. In May, he led the Canadian delegation to the founding meeting of the United Nations Organization in San Francisco. Unlike the League of Nations in 1919, the United Nations accepted the cold reality of power politics. The 5 great powers had already decided that they would control the UN. Sitting in a Security Council, they would be armed with decisive veto power. The rest had the right of discussion in a General Assembly. Attention was focused on the steely Russian, Molotov, and the giants of the West. Although Canada had not been invited to Dumbarton Oaks or Yalta, where the basic decisions had been made, she accepted